The Offense Offensive by Lawrence M. Krauss. There's a growing public perception that being offended confers special rights, while also imposing obligations on the offending parties. It doesn't, or at least it shouldn't. Nevertheless, as a consequence of the current educational focus on issues of diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism, this warped viewpoint is insinuating itself into higher education and research at a level that is increasingly threatening free speech, academic freedom, and with it, scientific progress. While there are many academic areas where raw political sensibilities might impact on scholarly discourse, it's hard to think of chemistry as such an area. Nevertheless, new guidelines for accepting and editing papers were recently sent to editors of the prestigious journal of the Royal Society of Chemistry. I quote, "Following the publication of the article by Hodlicki in Angewandte Chemie and the identification of a potentially offensive image in a journal, a set of guidelines has been produced by RSC staff to help minimize the risk of publishing inappropriate or otherwise offensive content. Offense is a subjective matter, and sensitivity to it spans a considerable range. However, we bear in mind that, and I emphasize this, it is the perception of the recipient that we should consider, regardless of the author's intention." Considering the perception of any and all recipients, regardless of author intent, can effectively freeze all discourse. It's hard to imagine any sentence spoken in the public domain today that cannot possibly be construed by someone as offensive. Lest one think that this is too great an extrapolation based on the guidance language alone, if one refers to the accompanying guidelines, one will find offensive content defined as, and I quote, "any content that could reasonably offend someone on the basis of their age, gender, race, sexual orientation, religious or political beliefs, marital or parental status, physical features, national origin, social status, or disability." In short, there's room to offend absolutely everyone. Consider what subjects could now be reasonably censored by editors according to this new edict. Much of evolutionary biology could now be verboten, since the very subject offends the religious sensibilities of many Americans. Same with the Big Bang. What about geology, where estimates of the age of rocks directly contradicts the hopes of young Earth creationists? Much of genetics research is already the source of vocal protest, especially the genomics of diverse populations. Sex and gender clearly become untouchable because of the widely varying views on the similarities and distinctions between the two. What about paleontology and archaeology and scientific study of finds like the Kennewick Man? Aboriginal groups wanted to repatriate the remains of this 9,000-year-old skeleton near Kennewick, Washington, in order to shield them from scientific study, because their cosmology was in conflict with the reality that domestic populations had their origin in the migration of earlier humans tens of thousands of years ago. Today, the Society for American Archaeology censored a talk by two archaeologists concerned about similar creationism creeping into archaeology. The Society claimed that such, quote, anti-indigenous language did not align with SAA values. In higher education, there used to be a vigorous debate between proponents of affirmative action and those who argued that this would negatively impact on merit-based promotion. Studies on either side of this debate are likely to offend some in the other camp. In this regard, it was particularly interesting that the preamble to the new RSC guidelines mentioned an article by Thomas Hodlicki of Brock University. In the article, Hodlicki questioned whether efforts to promote diversity by prioritizing inclusion of certain groups may be done at the expense of meritocracy. The reaction was swift. Following an outcry by a predictably offended social media mob, the journal retracted the article, removed it from its website, and replaced several editors involved in its publication. Lest one assume that in areas far removed from hot-button issues, the thinking that led to RSC guidelines is likely to have little effect, consider a recent example from the Journal of Hospital Medicine. Having published a piece in April entitled "Tribalism, the Good, the Bad, and the Future," discussing the dangers to medicine of tribal in-group and out-group behavior, the editors of the journal immediately then retracted the article in response to social media reaction that these terms can be hurtful to some. They then removed all references to the tribes and tribalism, including a definition of these terms that was provided at the beginning of the article. They then republished a revised version and wrote an editorial in May apologizing for their act of microaggression by publishing a piece with terms whose connotations some people might find offensive. As the above example illustrates, offensive language is now often rephrased as hurting feelings, which concomitant feelings of abuse or discrimination were felt. Similarly, language offense can be interpreted as a form of harassment, producing a hostile environment that can produce suspensions or firing. Faculty now regularly remove potentially offensive images and lessons and languages from their teaching materials because of the potential ramifications for their own academic security. If the quashing of writing, discussion, and open inquiry reflected in these episodes becomes the norm rather than the exception, the future of education and scientific publication doesn't look good. Perhaps the editors of scientific journals should reflect more deeply on the content of offense by reading what various authors have had to say on the subject. The polymath British writer, actor, and intellectual Stephen Fry wrote, I quote, "It is now very common to hear people say, 'I'm rather offended by that,' as if that gives them certain rights. It has no meaning, it has no purpose, it has no reason to be respected as a phrase. I'm offended by that. Well, so blanking what?" Less provocatively, the late writer and journalist Christopher Hitchens wrote, "If someone tells me that I've hurt their feelings, I say, I'm still waiting to hear what your point is. In this country, I've been told that's offensive, as if those two words constitute an argument or a comment. Not to me, they don't." Hitchens, who passed away in 2011, would have found the new world of publishing today very different from the one in which he produced his brilliant, if sometimes biting, essays and books. I suspect much of what he wrote then simply wouldn't be published today. Anna Krylov, a distinguished chemist at USC, unearthed a more distant example, demonstrating the historical disconnect with modern concerns about the risk of causing offense. The concern may not be new in science, but decisions to let it impact on scientific publishing is. Anton von Leeuwenhoek's pioneering development of microscopy helped found modern microbiology. When von Leeuwenhoek discovered spermatozoa in semen, he was concerned that communicating his new results might cause offense. As he put it, while communicating his results to the president of the Royal Society for publication in its philosophical transactions, quote, "If your lordship should consider that these observations may disgust or scandalize the learned, I earnestly beg your lordship to regard them as private and to publish them or destroy them as your lordship sees fit." Fortunately, for the progress of biology, his lordship wasn't as concerned about causing offense then as are the editors of modern scientific journals, and von Leeuwenhoek's results were published. The bottom line is this: if you're offended by something you read, or your feelings are otherwise hurt, you own the problem. You can choose to deal with it in a variety of ways, either by refusing to read any potentially offensive material, by ignoring the offense, or by writing cogently in response, critiquing the ideas you find offensive. But it is your problem to deal with. Others are not obliged to cater to your sensibilities in advance, nor need they be censored after the fact. In my day, recognizing this reality was called growing up.